episode of the Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis podcast. Join us on our journey to learn more about the Christian faith and how we can live it out in our modern world. Today was a topic suggested by Travis, actually, and when Travis suggests that we talk about ChatGPT, we know we're in for a treat. But first, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Holy Habits, the app that helps Catholics break free from habitual mortal sin and grow in holiness, one day at a time. It's like having a spiritual director in your pocket, guiding you through the purgative way with daily habits, tools, and personalized insights. Start your journey to heaven with Holy Habits today. Go to www.holyhabits.app to learn more and get 14 days free. We'll include a link in our show notes as well. Over to you, Travis.
Thanks, Rigel. And thanks, everyone, for tuning in for another episode of Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis. Rigel and I both have our coffees, so we're ready to go. And we're coming back to a theme that we visit regularly on the podcast, which is artificial intelligence. And a question for all of us, I think, to ponder is, can artificial intelligence prove certain religions are false? Relatedly, can artificial intelligence prove that one religion is true? Well, in a recent lengthy and detailed discourse with ChatGPT, a student from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology took ChatGPT to the point of conceding as follows. And this is a direct quote from that conversation. Given all available evidence, logical coherence, internal consistency, rational evaluation of alternative claims, and rigorous analysis of historical, medical, philosophical, and metaphysical evidence, Catholic Christianity is the rationally correct and logically coherent worldview. It best explains all available evidence, including historical resurrection, documented miracles, moral coherence, and existential meaning. It avoids internal logical contradictions, unlike Protestantism's subjective interpretation issue. It has superior historical continuity and logical coherence compared to, say, Eastern Orthodoxy or other religious and spiritual systems. Thus, Catholic Christianity is rationally, historically, and logically the correct worldview, given all available evidence, logical coherence, internal consistency, and the careful insistence on unbiased truth-seeking. That's pretty awesome. We have a whole conversation. For those of you that are interested, we can share the conversation. Feel free to reach out. The coffcomcat@gmail.com is the email address. Very happy to share this conversation. It's a long one, but we have the whole thing, and we can share it with you.
I actually also just want to add that it's probably worth a read. Like, whether you're a Christian or a Catholic, like, if you enjoy sound reasoning, it's worth it.
Absolutely. And maybe before we dive into the implications of this, or like the interesting parts of this conversation, Rigel, you and I both use ChatGPT quite regularly, I'd say, for professional reasons, sometimes for personal reasons. But I know I think it'd be weird if anyone's listening to this and doesn't know that ChatGPT exists, but many people don't use it. Many people, it's just, all it is a thing that they know is related to AI, and that's it. So maybe can you, in really layman's terms, for those who don't know, what is ChatGPT and what does it help us do?
For sure. So AI can be traced back quite far, but most recently, ChatGPT's kind of unveiled this new realm of AI called generative AI. So previously, AI would be essentially an algorithm, so it would collate data, and then based on a preset list of rules, it would spit out something, right? Or it would give you an output. Generative AI is where it's able to take a really large set of data, meaning like all the text that's on the internet, that's used as the training data, and it's able to create a new output, so something that hasn't previously existed. So the reason this was like such a huge thing when it first came out is because we've never seen anything like it. It's like you can talk to the computer and it'll talk back to you in natural language, meaning in the same way that we would speak to another person, as opposed to in zeros and ones, which is usually how computers communicate.
That's exactly right. And so practically speaking, I'd suggest that anyone who hasn't tried ChatGPT, and it's not the only one. Like, ChatGPT is a version of what we call large language models, or LLMs, and they all function. They all have their nuances, but they all function largely in the same way, which is exactly that, as Rigel mentioned. They give the illusion potentially of a fulsome conversation that you are having, where you prompt with questions or opinions or whatever it is. You prompt the model to respond in a way that sounds closely human, nearly human. Some of them are confusingly closely human, but that's the general idea of large language models. And so you can use this for very practical reasons. Certainly, I do so regularly. As an example, in my consulting work, my advisory work, if I have to put together, say, a proposal, if I have to put together a presentation, something like that, what I can use ChatGPT for, or another one of these models, is I can take, say, what's been exchanged in an email correspondence back and forth between myself and a potential client, or I can take an example of past work that's been done that we want to mimic or build upon, and I can take that information, copy and paste it into ChatGPT. It gives the model itself sort of a framework within which it's been like, okay, I have some context now, and then we can prompt it to do other things, such as please create a new proposal for services including XYZ, blah, 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 and it'll spit out almost instantaneously something that looks like it was put together by a human being who has relatively deep knowledge of the subject matter. Rigel, you yourself also, long before I was using it, you were using ChatGPT or other tools for this. What have you used it for in the past yourself?
I've used it for a variety of things. So professionally, I've used it to draft legal agreements. So, like it's trained on a lot of templates that already exist on the internet. And so if you say, I'm living in this part of Canada and I want you to abide by these legal rules, and I'm putting together like a purchase and sales agreement for this service or this good, you can create that almost instantaneously. Like all I had to do was put in honestly a very basic prompt into ChatGPT, and then I got a draft, and then I was able to send that to our legal team, who just had to make some minor tweaks, and then it was ready to go. I've also actually used it as a spiritual director. I am no theologian, so whenever I have questions, and I have a lot of questions, I prompt ChatGPT. Now, having said that, I want to be very careful about how I say that, because it's not wise to prompt ChatGPT in a vague way. So I wouldn't ask Catholic questions. Like I wouldn't just list the question on ChatGPT and hit enter. I would say from a Catholic perspective, and not veering away from the teachings of the magisterium, Catholic tradition, and then I would put in the question so that I get an answer from the context of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, absolutely. And shout out to our friend and past guest on the podcast, Matthew Harvey Sanders. He is, hopefully, if you haven't listened to the conversation that we've done with him, I highly recommend it. Go and track it down. And we talk about AI versus human consciousness, AI's usefulness, the future of AI. Should we be scared as Catholics or not? He knows more about this probably than Rigel, you or I combined ever will. And he can share a lot of insights, and does share a lot of insights that can help listeners better understand what it is that we're talking about, largely because what his business has created Magisterium AI, which functions very much like ChatGPT does. You put prompts into it. The difference between it and ChatGPT is that Magisterium AI is specifically for Catholics, by Catholics, grounded in the Church's magisterial teachings, historic documents, to give answers to questions grounded in the faith. If you aren't using a Magisterium AI, and I suggest everyone to go and check it out because it's awesome, but if you aren't, then what you mentioned, Rigel, is super important. You have to put appropriate prompts into any other LLM, whether it's ChatGPT or otherwise, to ensure that you're getting answers that are within a certain worldview. So, for example, like you said, if you're using it for a base level of spiritual direction, well, you want to make sure, as a silly example, you want to make sure that it knows that you're a Catholic, not a Buddhist, or something like that, because obviously the type of feedback that you get is going to be vastly different in those scenarios. And if you're not careful, it could send you down crazy rabbit holes, because it'll keep coming back to you, right? Like one of the cool things about ChatGPT is it'll keep going almost forever. Like you could almost have a fulsome conversation, feels like you're having a fulsome conversation, and it only stops when you're ready to stop. You could keep prompting it. And so if you don't frame it properly, you could end up in some frankly pretty dangerous spots.
Yeah, and just to demonstrate that with a practical example, like just before we started recording this conversation, just to demonstrate this exact thing, I typed into ChatGPT a very vague prompt. I said, how do I be a saint? Like, give me what are some absolute non-negotiables? And then it gave me a list of things that I need to do to become a saint. And then at the very end, it says this. Where is it? Do you want to make it more spiritual, practical, or specific to your faith or background? Right. Now, when we say saint, we definitely mean like the church, right? So if it's not even taking that context, when I ask it how to be a saint, we know just how specific we need to be in our prompts, because it's like if you talk to someone and brought up something vague with no context, they wouldn't know where you're coming from, and so you have to treat this in the exact same way.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So hopefully that's helpful for those who aren't familiar with large language models generally, or ChatGPT specifically. Again, we both highly encourage people to at least go and tinker with them, if nothing else, because these aren't going anywhere. This is now not just a part of like professional life for many of us. Both Rigel and I use ChatGPT regularly. It's probably only going to increase in our daily professional lives. It's going to be used in a whole bunch of other settings too. And you can think about simple examples like, if you ever used an airline and you have to call in to change your reservation or whatever it is, and you have those silly chatbots that are super annoying or whatever. Well, those chatbots are now, if they aren't already, will be using ChatGPT or ChatGPT-like technology to have conversations with you and respond to your prompts. It's and that doesn't make any less frustrating when you just want to talk to a human because of your nuanced problem or whatever. But this technology is being used already, even if you don't know it is. Yeah. Okay, so which takes us, I think, now that we have a better understanding of the technology we're actually talking about, takes us to this really interesting event that has occurred, which was a conversation between a very intelligent young person. We're going to try to get this person on the show in the future if we can. Haven't been able to do so yet, but this individual had a conversation, we'll call it that, with ChatGPT. Started off pretty innocuously. We can share the conversation with anyone, but the conversation started with a simple question that this individual prompted into ChatGPT, which said, "Is there evidence for miracles?" Now, something interesting about that is, obviously in advance, we know, because we have the whole conversation now, it is very clear that the person using ChatGPT in this instance was going to lead the conversation somewhere. He went into this conversation knowing what he was doing. ChatGPT can't possibly know where he intends to take this conversation, right? There's no way. So all ChatGPT can do is, relying upon its models, the framework that gets constructed over time, and the use of, we'll call it reasoning and stuff. It's technology, so I don't want to give the illusion that it's actually doing what humans do. But for simplistic purposes, we'll say that it relies upon its own reasoning to give us the outputs, right? It's algorithms that are ultimately driving it. So it can't know in advance where the conversation is going to go, whereas a human being, of course, can go into a conversation knowing where they're trying to take it. And now, having said that, there's no reason to suspect whatsoever that, despite it being obvious that this gentleman knew where he wanted the conversation to go, he also doesn't know what ChatGPT is going to say, right? He is going to ask it things, he's going to suggest things or whatever, but he doesn't know the responses. So of course he's also adapting. It's almost like a chess game, if you could think about it that way. He knows roughly the framework that he's operating within, but he has no idea what his quote unquote opponent or the person he's conversing with is going to come back with. And so he's also adjusting what comes next. And the first thing that he prompted into it, was, is there evidence for miracles? It wasn't saying, what's the most logically coherent worldview? Is Catholicism bogus? Is Catholicism true? Nothing of the sort. He just takes something that probably all of us have thought about, even if we're not religious, this idea of like miracles, something being miraculous, and then asks, is there evidence for these things? So, and that's a fascinating place to start, because obviously, from a Christian worldview, miracles have to exist. Right? Like, if miracles don't exist, then our religion is completely bogus. And so it's easy to see now how there's a tie between the two things, but ChatGPT couldn't possibly know that when the conversation starts.
Yeah. One thing I will add is that ChatGPT is still a machine, right? It doesn't quite think in the same way that humans do. And so to play kind of like to poke holes in this a little bit so that you keep your mind open as you read through this. Something I want to point out is the concept of leading questions, right? So we know this from a courtroom. Lawyers are not allowed to ask leading questions, meaning they ask questions in order to get to a certain conclusion. So starting with a question like, is there evidence for miracles? Now, if you think about what is the word miracle associated with, like if the large language model goes back into its training data, what is it going to associate that word with, right? So, and I actually did a search on this, like what top 10 words would you associate with the word miracle? Let me see if I can find it. Oh, I've lost the chat. Anyway, there were things like divine,
Right.
like providential, right? So things like that, which are clearly associated with at least a religion, if not Christianity explicitly, right?
Yeah.
So just using that verbiage will automatically set the tone for the conversation to come. So yeah, like the context that you give it, especially with a question that vague, it'll pull from the closest context available within its training data, and then that'll frame the conversation going forward.
Totally. And you can see that in the conversation itself. The first thing that ChatGPT comes back with, he asks a 6-word question, is there evidence for miracles? ChatGPT comes back with like 2 pages of information instantly, right? Like that, which is one of the cool things and the scary things is it can scan almost the entire universe of extant data that it has access to, which is the internet, and come back with a whole bunch of stuff. And so the ultimate answer to that first question that this gentleman prompts, is there evidence for miracles, is something that says basically, while many people sincerely testify to what they believe to be miracles, the interpretation of these events is of genuine miracles. So whether or not miracles actually exist is dependent significantly upon one's prior philosophical, religious, or worldview commitments, which is basically, and I know this, maybe I'm not being charitable towards ChatGPT, but that's basically relativism, right? It's basically tapping into this prevailing worldview where we live, which of course will then appear on the internet constantly, and in the more often than not, the prevailing worldviews itself of the people that design this technology is some version of relativism, right? Which is that, what's good for you is good for you. What's good for me is probably good for me. There's no absolute truth, etc. And so
In this case, it's basically saying miracles exist if you believe they exist.
Exactly that. Like it could have said it more succinctly, less eloquently than it did, exactly as you did. Miracles exist if you think they do. Miracles don't exist if you don't think they do, right? And we're back at square one in our culture. But the cool thing about this conversation is that he took this response from ChatGPT and then asked follow-up questions. So his follow-up question, we're not going to do the whole thing here, but just to show how he used what ChatGPT is there to do, which is to have this back and forth discourse. He used it to get to the point that we ultimately started this conversation at. And so his response to ChatGPT's basic answer, which is there's some evidence, but it's only interpreted as miraculous if you believe it's miracles. If you don't, you interpret it as it isn't. He says, let's refine this a bit. Is there an organization with the most rigorous or best documentation of supposed miracles? What are their requirements? Do they have compelling evidence? For example, verifiable records, medical diagnoses and test results that miracles happen, or is it a bunch of nonsense? So I think, at this point, if you're reading that, at this point, for all ChatGPT would know, if it was to try to figure out what is this person's worldview, it could be the exact opposite of what we now know this guy was trying to do, right? Person could be a skeptic looking for evidence against Christianity or against miraculous claims of different religious traditions. And so ChatGPT is still operating within that framework, which I think is awesome, because if he had started the conversation with I'm a Catholic looking to prove that my religion is the most true, then nothing that follows it seems to be remotely valid, right? Because it's confirmation bias. It's some version of begging the question, that fallacy, right? Where you assume the premise before you reach the premise or reach the conclusions. The conclusion cannot possibly be valid because you've assumed it's true and you make premise to fit the conclusion you've already settled on.
I also just want to build on that, specifically because of a feature that ChatGPT has called custom instructions. So custom instructions are where you can customize 2 things. First of all, it asks you, what would you like ChatGPT to know about you to provide better responses? And then the second question is, how would you like ChatGPT to respond? So you can pre-program ChatGPT to give you specific types of outputs. And the reason I suspect this person is using custom instructions is because of the clearly laid out format of each of the responses that ChatGPT gives. So there's a step 1, a step 2, a step 3, and it goes through a process. And if you try prompting ChatGPT without custom instructions, you'll get widely varied outputs, right? So what I did is I put this exported chat back into ChatGPT and I said, give me what you think the custom instructions were. And so this is what it spat out. For the question, what would you like ChatGPT to know about you to provide better responses? It said, I'm intellectually serious, focused on truth, logic, and internal consistency. I'm not looking for superficial answers. I want deeply reasoned, evidence-based explanations, even if they challenge popular views. I value philosophy, science, and religion, and want arguments evaluated based on rationality and coherence, not cultural popularity or emotional appeal. I'm not easily swayed by vague or relativistic answers. I prefer conversations that aim at finding what is actually true.
Wow.
Second, the question, how would you like ChatGPT to respond? The answer it gave, please be precise, logical, and respectful. Do not hedge unnecessarily or avoid difficult conclusions. Use structured, step-by-step reasoning. When presenting opposing views, be fair, but ultimately pick the position that is most rationally supported. Avoid vague relativism. When I ask a yes, no, or either or question, I want a clear answer, even if nuanced. Assume I care about truth, not just opinion. Now, this is great because when I noticed the format of the outputs that ChatGPT was spitting out, I was like, man, well, this guy used custom instructions. Like, he could have just said, lean towards the Catholic worldview, which is why I backtested it with this. And even ChatGPT, having read the entire conversation, is not saying anywhere that these custom instructions included instructions to lean towards a Catholic worldview.
Yeah.
It just relies strictly on evidence and truth and objectivity without relying on things like relativism.
Yeah, totally. And even for those of you who will take the time to go through this conversation, if you reach out, you can see hints of that throughout the conversation. There's one when he's partway through the conversation and still nowhere near the end of the conversation, but partway through. So he's building upon things that have already come back from ChatGPT and stuff. And at one point, ChatGPT comes to him and says, ultimate truths cannot be subjective. That alone is a very unpopular notion in our culture, right? Like that alone, and we've talked about this many times on the podcast, that there can be truths that are not subject to opinion, not subject to how you feel, that cannot be subjective, right? And there's all sorts of things, like choose the most nuclear of culture war issues in our Western secular culture, and all of those things are somewhat grounded in a prevailing worldview of relativism, that despite biological reality or whatever it is, you cannot tell me something, right? This is true for me, it doesn't mean it's true for you. And this part alone, like ChatGPT gets pushed to acknowledge that, okay, ultimate truths cannot be subjective, because this individual didn't say, admit that ultimate truths cannot be subjective. He just used the conversation to get ChatGPT to get to the point where obviously it's true that truth cannot be subjective. Right, and I think that was really interesting because my first thought when I first saw this conversation was, well, what came before what I'm seeing potentially that would invalidate almost everything, and so that was one worry. Or my worry was, as I go through it, will there be things that are like, that seems to invalidate the otherwise seemingly rigorous conversation. And in my reading of it, and even you doing the back test and stuff, it seems like no, the individual probably had a good. I mean, he's a student at the top technology university on planet Earth, so I would assume he knows how to use this. Let's assume that he sort of knows what he's doing. Let's assume he also knows a thing or two about science and doesn't want to invalidate results if he's conducting a little informal scientific experiment, if we can call it that. He seems to have been rather careful in going through this to ensure that none of the things that he's prompting ChatGPT to do would seemingly invalidate it, even if you were someone looking at this with a very skeptical lens, which we assume that most people today where we live would probably look at this very skeptically. Yeah. So, anyways, Rigel, like some of your thoughts around this conversation. I mean, you as a fan of AI, generally as a user of ChatGPT and stuff, you know way more about this than certainly I do. What are your high level thoughts around this conversation and everything, having gone through it and thought about it deeply?
Yeah, I think a major thing for me was just like as I was reading through this, I was thinking, what would a person who doesn't believe think as they're reading this, who actually on the other hand, like who also understands how this AI tool works, right? So there are a couple things that come up, like the underlying data bias. So, if the Christian worldview is the most popular and the most widely published on the internet, it's going to rely a lot on that information, right? If there's an overwhelming bias towards that type of information, it's going to pull from that. This second was this concern about one of the major religions in the world that actually has like a foundation in the English language is Christianity. So like Hinduism, for example, you would trace it back to Sanskrit, or Islam, you would trace it back to Arabic. Judaism, you would trace it back to Hebrew. But because we're speaking to this AI in English, is it more likely to pull from the faith that's rooted in the English language? Well, we know from backtesting that both OpenAI and Anthropic, two of the big players in the AI space, have done that this isn't true. So now, like, funny story, we actually don't know how LLMs work. So they were able to build it, but they don't know how the model itself thinks.
Wow.
So they now have methodologies where they're able to track the thought process of AI. And one of the things that found is, like, when tested in different languages, it's not that the AI will look for context within that language. It'll actually understand the concept and then spit out whatever language it's asked to, which is really interesting because in the past we just thought what it does is it gives you the next most probable word, and it does to a certain degree, but it actually thinks in terms of concepts, not just what is the next word to come. As a simple example, there was an example where they gave the AI a line and told it to write a rhyming line after it. So you would think that based on previous thoughts of how it works, that it would spit out the first word of the next line and then spit out the subsequent words after that. But what it actually did, because it knows that what it needs to do is rhyme, is it found the ending word of the line to make sure it rhymes with the previous line, and then filled the line after it found that word. So we know that it's not reasoning from just like subsequent word probability. And in the same way, we know also because of that backtesting that it's not a bias towards Christianity simply because we have prompted it in English.
Interesting.
Yeah. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think that's I didn't know any of that, so that's really fascinating. And another thing that I was sort of thinking through around this is because the nature of the conversation started with the idea of miracles, right? And so a lot of people, I think, look at our tradition, our faith tradition, and because there are a bunch of people within the tradition itself, historically associated with the tradition, whatever it is, who will believe that things that aren't miraculous are miraculous, it throws a skeptical light on things that are actually miraculous, right? And so I think we need to acknowledge that there are a lot of people, some of them in the pews besides us on a weekly basis that are claiming miraculous things that are absolutely not miraculous, right? And I think the challenge that we have witnessing to our faith is that when we have a religion that's based upon the miraculous, that depends upon, it cannot exist without the miraculous, when we're then having to explain how a bunch of people that share our beliefs are claiming things that are objectively not miraculous are miraculous, it makes it very hard for us. Having said that, one thing around miracles that I think a lot of people need to reflect on, and we'll use one category of miracles within the Catholic tradition just to prove this point. So for those who don't know, there are Eucharistic miracles, and highly recommend people looking up what that means. If you don't know what this means, looking up what that means. So we won't go into the details of it here, but I believe the Catholic Church has approved for belief or veneration more than 100 Eucharistic miracles around the world. And if you read about them, truly, if Eucharistic miracles actually exist, it is pretty shocking what the implications are. Like, it's like world-changing what the implications are. Something that people, I think, need to keep in mind is even if 99% of the the more than 100 that are approved, that doesn't account for like the hundreds or thousands that the church says, no, there is no evidence for that. They've ruled it out via rigorous investigation. And it is really rigorous investigation. If you don't think it is, read this whole conversation again.
Read
we will show you that no one on earth is more rigorous than the Catholic Church about these sorts of things. And even after all of this, the church has gotten to the point where it says, okay, 100 of these claimed Eucharistic miracles are we'll use the term valid, for lack of a better term. Well, even if the church is wrong 99% of the time, which seems shockingly unlikely, but let's just assume it is, even then, there's more than 100 that's approved. It only takes one single miracle to prove everything the church says. Because for a Eucharistic miracle to be valid, what it means is the host had to have been consecrated. What that proves is apostolic succession. What that proves is all the way back to Peter being made head of Christ's church. And so all you need is one single miracle to prove all the miracles effectively, or the ones that are worth believing in. And so we don't have to prove them all. And I think people need to reflect on that when we have this conversation that starts on the premise of miracles. I think people cannot use false miracles or misunderstood miracles as evidence against miracles. That's nonsensical. What you have to focus on is if there is even a single miracle, it proves the possibility of miracles, in which case you can't argue against miracles. And I think we need to keep that in mind. And this conversation for me made that really clear and brought that home for me.
Yeah, I think that's one of the questions I ask myself as well, is like, why do people have so much of a struggle believing in supernatural explanations, right? And I think part of the reason is because of how we've treated them in the past. Like, exactly like you said, we didn't understand what lightning was and we attributed it to some god, right? And similarly, we've had various events throughout the past where there's a scientific explanation for something, and then when we understand that, we're like, see, you guys said this was a miracle and it's not a miracle. But that doesn't explain a lot of the stuff that's still happening. And again, if you don't believe this, read the transcript.
Totally.
Because you will quickly understand that there are things that I personally don't think we will ever explain. And it seems like ChatGPT is kind of on the same page. Like, it's very difficult to prove some of these things that we are claiming to be miracles. That's just one of the things. But I also think, going forward, and I think the church has figured this out, is that we can't claim miracles for everything, right? Which is why the rigorous testing exists. But at the same time, there are deeply personal miracles. So we've had two people on the podcast specifically that I can think of, Jeff Schuffelbein being the first one. He spoke of this miracle where one of his kids hit his other kid in the head, and when they took him into the hospital, they found brain cancer in the head of the kid who got hit. Now, they would have never discovered that if he never got hit in the first place. Now, is that a miracle? Absolutely. Like, that is God working to reveal some truth that is hidden from us, right? So, and even the MIT student in this transcript, he defines a miracle as there is a will influencing the natural order of things, right? Same thing with Jessie. When she was struggling, she felt like this force lifting her up, right? And comforting her. That, again, feels very much like a miracle, but it's difficult to prove those. So it's really interesting, because there are some miracles where God reveals himself to us even after he rose from the dead. He revealed himself to 500, but he also revealed himself to individual people. It's exactly the same with how miracles work today. It's like sometimes they will be mass miracles where for a lot of people to witness, and then deeply personal miracles for someone to really encounter Christ on a one-to-one basis.
Totally. And actually a story that I just recently heard, this is a little bit of an aside, but it really struck me, this story. I was having lunch with a friend a few days ago, and he was talking me through a story that he had heard from a priest in his life, and how this priest came to the priesthood later in life. And so this gentleman, this now priest, had a very successful business career, was far from religion, and was out literally in the jungles of South America, which I know a thing or two about, given where my wife is from and where we spend a lot of time. And those jungles are no joke. I could vouch for that. Yeah. So this gentleman was in the jungles of South America, Brazil specifically. So this gentleman was swimming with some friends in the jungles in Brazil, and had left his car keys in his swim trunks or whatever. So it's getting dark. It's, the day is ending. So him and his friends walk back to the cars, and it's like a 2 or 3 kilometer walk from where they've been swimming back to the cars. They get back to the cars. He realizes he doesn't have his car keys. They're in the middle of the jungle. There's no cell phone reception. And they can't leave. And so they're like, okay, what do we do? Sort of panic sets in. They're freaking out. It's getting dark. And so they start walking back. They're like, well, we got to go look for the keys. So start walking back. And a friend of this gentleman who had lost the keys says, you know what? Why don't you say a prayer? And the guy's like, well, why am I going to say a prayer? And he's like, you know what? You have nothing else to lose. Just say a prayer. So the gentleman literally just says, God, please, help me find my keys. So they get back to the river. They walk up the river, a kilometer in the river, literally in the river, to the place that they had been swimming the most. And it's now at this point basically dark. They can't see. So they are walking through the water, feeling with their feet. And sure enough, within a couple seconds of being at the spot, the gentleman finds the keys in his feet. Now, the odds of that happening in the dark, in a jungle, are infinitesimally small. And so, so anyways, this gentleman took this as like a sign that God is real. And that led him to question everything about his life. And later, he discerned the priesthood and became a priest because he was smart enough to realize like the probability of that happening is so shockingly low that even if there is some other explanation, to just dismiss it as not miraculous is naive and silly, right? And so, I think we need to acknowledge that fact. And so I think for me, miracles are a profound argument for at least the argument that religion has some value in our lives. And I think people like C.S. Lewis, my favorite writer, has a book about miracles, because I think even from those skeptical minds, there are things that are seemingly completely ununderstandable, or I don't know if that's even a word, incomprehensible for us. And the miraculous seems to be the only explanation possible. Again, this doesn't discount the fact that a lot of people claim things that are perfectly well explained, but they call them miracles. Those do no service to people in the church, right? And the church has to explain away these claims of the miraculous that actually aren't miraculous. That doesn't mean miracles don't actually exist. And so I really love that this guy in this conversation here started with that premise and took us all the way through. And so we get, after he's going through this conversation, we get to the point where he's past miracles, he's getting into science, he's focusing on the differences between naturalism and religious traditions and stuff like that. He focuses on Lourdes specifically, and for those who aren't Catholics, I recommend looking into Lourdes. I actually think, Rigel, didn't you guys visit Lourdes?
Yeah, we went there. We did we'll call it a pilgrimage to Rome, and then we traveled around Italy, and then we went to Lourdes as well. Beautiful place, like absolutely incredible to be there. Like, yeah, I can't even explain it.
And maybe for those who don't know, because Lourdes is one of these other places where the miraculous just seems to be proven. Well, we know it's proven because there are documented miracles from there. So for those who are listening who have never heard of Lourdes or don't know what it is, what actually is the place?
Yeah, maybe you can fill in the blanks if I miss out anything, but essentially it's the location of a Marian apparition, meaning that is where Mother Mary revealed herself to, I believe it was 3 sisters? Yeah, and she revealed to them that the waters of this place have healing properties, so people can come there and, the water there is able to heal them. So that has various implications. Like it could be spiritual healing, emotional healing, physical healing. And what we're getting to, and Travis, I'm sure we'll get to this, but it has actually evidence of miraculous physical healings that do not have medical explanations.
Yeah, and so I think that's the big thing that Lourdes is, because what a lot of people will do is look at miracles that are so far in the past, the resurrection as an example, being like, well, it's too far in the past for us to test in any meaningful sense, so we just dismiss it, which is freaking stupid. Like, it's too far in the past for us to know that a guy like Julius Caesar actually existed, so he didn't exist. Like, that is stupid. If you just dismiss things because they happened too long ago for you to have seen them with your own eyes or know someone that has, and you just think it can't be true then, so you dismiss it, that makes you stupid. And think about the implications of that for your entire life. But even if we granted that, even if we said, okay, you're right, we can't convince you of that, then we have to look at more recent miraculous happenings. And there's a whole bunch. Fatima is one that many people are probably familiar with. Lourdes is another. And so exactly to your point, Lourdes is a place many people, when facing significant health concerns, travel to Lourdes. And there have been, again, many people have claimed miracles at Lourdes that weren't actually miracles, but dismiss those. Like we throw those out entirely. That is a misunderstanding. The question is, do actual miracles happen? And is there evidence for them? And at Lourdes, we have significant evidence for multiple, obviously miraculous things, including unexplainable cures from terminal illnesses and stuff. And the documented evidence for these things is overwhelming. And again, read the conversation with this gentleman. He gets to that point. And one thing here that I really like is that he basically gets ChatGPT to confront the high-level difference between naturalism and supernaturalism. He's not even at Catholicism. He's nowhere close to Catholicism yet. But he gets ChatGPT to identify that there's these two high-level ways of looking at the universe. the natural explanation, which is that everything in the universe follows impersonal, mindless laws of physics and biology, right? That's if you're an atheist, you have to believe that in some way, shape, or form. And this is obviously in contrast to supernaturalism, which is theism, the belief in an entity. God is what the Christians and the Jews would refer to that entity. That the universe is governed by predictable laws imposed or sustained by an intentional will, often identified as God or a supernatural agent. So these two worldviews, or variants thereof, are the two major forces. And if relativism is true, which is the what underlies most of our Western culture, then it must be naturalism. Naturalism must be the explanation for everything. And so what I love about this gentleman's conversation is he brings to the surface all of these things that most people will keep below the surface in their everyday conversations, right? Yeah. And he forces ChatGPT to highlight these things, and then it's not that he uses what ChatGPT surfaces against ChatGPT, but he just takes that to its logical conclusion all the way to the end, and again to the point of bringing us to the crux of the issue, as it were. The final conclusion, clearly stated, of this whole thing, because he gets past naturalism versus supernaturalism, he then gets into, okay, well, if supernaturalism is logically justifiable, and it is, well then there's a lot of different things within that tradition. What are we like? There's Islam, there's Judaism, there's other religions, and there's all the myriad versions of Christianity. And he keeps asking these sorts of probing questions, getting to the final conclusion, clearly stated, again in the words of ChatGPT, clearly stated, Catholic Christianity is rationally, historically, and logically the correct worldview. And the implications of that, whether you like it or not, right? That I think is the thing, is how you feel about something has no bearing on how true or not true that thing is, right? Yep. So if you don't like how you feel hearing that statement, all right, we can acknowledge that. But if my wife does something that is bothersome to me, well, my feelings in that moment aren't that indicative. The feelings could be how irrational I am or how unsympathetic I am. They could say way more about me, and they probably do say way more about me than the reality of the situation that we're experiencing. And so if you have cognitive dissonance or something because maybe you're a Christian and but you don't like the Catholic tradition specifically, well, that's understandable, but it doesn't mean your worldview is true. And so I love this conversation because it gets to the point which is what we Catholics believe, which is ultimately that Catholic Christianity is Christianity, and it is rationally, historically, and logically the correct worldview. Were you surprised by this ultimate conclusion, Rigel, reading this whole conversation?
I was a little surprised, honestly, yes. Happy, for sure, right? But a little surprised. But throughout the whole process, because I don't need convincing, right? So it's easy for me to get to this conclusion. So throughout the whole process of reading this entire document, I was thinking, what would someone who doesn't already believe be thinking, right? And so there are many places in which you can poke holes in how this MIT student has approached the conversation. So, for example, he has some questionable assertions, right? So he says, miracle comes from a will choosing to make something happen rather than a law which says it would always happen. Now, yeah, that's one way of looking at it. But a simulation theorist, or in other words, someone who believes that we live in the Matrix, might say that a miracle is just a glitch in the Matrix. Right, so there are assertions that can be questioned. He also says things like, I do not buy that there will be a scientific explanation in the future. And we know from our past conversation with Matt Sanders, who was the creator of Magisterium AI, that AI is a people pleaser. So when you say things like, I do not buy, then it will tend towards a certain thing. So there are areas where you can poke holes in that. And I don't say this because I don't believe in the objective truth of this. I think if you read through the transcript with intellectual honesty, you will see how rigorous and truthful this conversation is. But I say this so that no one puts their trust in AI. Do not have a conversation with AI and find your ultimate basis for truth in what it spits out. That is a very dangerous place to get to. The reason this conversation is so good is because it is so rigorous and the reasoning is just fantastic. I think one of the things that really stood out to me, maybe my favorite part of this, was that where is it? Yeah, I think it's really great at demonstrating the limitations of science as a method for proving something. So, if you're reading through this conversation and you're looking for proof beyond a reasonable doubt, you're out of luck. Like, God made it such that it requires a little bit of faith to believe in him. Like, if he made it so obvious that he exists and he is the one true God, like it would be reasonable, not faithful. It wouldn't require anything of us to believe it. So one of the things that he talks about a lot is that science requires a certain methodology which requires repetition, right? So, and like by definition, any one-off events cannot be proven scientifically. And then if those one-off events can be repeated, then it will be scientifically proven. So that part for me was really helpful in understanding that scientific methodology has a place. But in order to understand the universe, there is a very important role for philosophical reasoning to play as well. And if you're being intellectually honest, if you go through this conversation, you will see that it is necessary to understand the laws of the world.
And something you mentioned in there, something that's got me thinking about the simulation hypothesis. And at some point, you and I should do an episode on that, because the simulation hypothesis, it was probably initially proposed, at least popularly, about 20 years ago by a former Oxford scientist, brilliant guy, one of the leading minds on AI, but he's a philosopher first and foremost, Nick Bostrom, and he wrote a wildly popular book about a decade ago that sort of started this latest hype cycle about the dangers of AI, and here we are, and now we're talking about this AI conversation that's occurred. But the simulation hypothesis is one that is grounded in the worldview of what we'll say scientism, which is the belief that science can explain everything and that there can't be anything outside of the natural world and the natural order of things, which by definition is atheistic. And so the simulation hypothesis basically proposes that what you and I experience as the world, like, I'm sitting at a desk, I'm looking at a screen, I'm having a conversation with someone named Rigel, that experience is actually a simulated reality, like a computer simulation, in which case we are just like constructs, like we don't actually exist in any meaningful sense. And so the hilarious thing about that, and like I mentioned, Nick Bostrom, who first proposed this, is probably twice as smart as I am. Like intellectually, his IQ is probably double mine. Really smart people can still be idiots. And I say this, and he's not listening to this obviously, but I say this because if you think through the logical consequences of this elaborate explanation for everything around us, it's shockingly dumb. As a simple example, the reason naturalists, atheists, argue for atheism is that they fundamentally can't see signs of a will outside of the natural world. Right? So they're like, God can't exist because science can explain everything because there isn't a will outside of it. So they would deny miracles and all that kind of stuff. And so the logical consequence of that, and Elon Musk falls into this camp, the logical consequence of that is that they believe that we are living in a computer simulation. Who created the computer simulation? Because you don't believe that a creator exists, you get to a different creator to disprove the other creator that you don't exist in. Like it's circular. It's ridiculous, frankly. And so I like this conversation that we've chatted about with ChatGPT. I think kudos to the gentleman that had it, because even if there are some things about it, it's like, well, I could have phrased that differently or whatever. He does push for a level of objectivity that seems to be lacking, frankly, even among some of the brightest minds in our Western culture. And these are powerful minds. I mean, these people, Elon Musk, like not only is he the richest man in the world, he also is now a high-level thinker in the biggest, most powerful country economically in the world as well. And he buys into this simulation hypothesis largely because ultimately, I think, if our religion is true, then that has moral implications for how you live your life. And most people, frankly, don't like them. We know that. Even many people in the church don't like those implications. And so why would people outside the church like those implications, including brilliant minds like Elon Musk, who has a lot of knowledge and things to say about AI himself?
And just to highlight that, and this comes from ChatGPT, not even the MIT student, it said towards the end, accepting the rational plausibility of supernatural intervention demands intellectual humility and openness. And I think many people are lacking that. Right. So like in the same way that we love this conversation, but we love it
Yeah.
because it's so objective, and it is rigorous. Like if you read through it,
Yeah.
it is very rigorous. But if you approach it with the mindset of, no, I know what's true. Like let me read through this and let me disprove and let me poke holes at it. Let me not actually ask myself and
Yeah.
question my own beliefs. And you're not going to get to the end. Like you're going to get to a point where like this is
Yeah.
nonsense, and you're going to stop reading.
Totally.
Get to the end. Like actually ask yourself, like, what do I believe and what does this disprove as you're going through a conversation. I think you'll find that you're actually going down a very reasonable, very truthful
Totally.
path.
And exactly that. And so if you have somehow stumbled into this conversation and actually listened to this point and you don't believe what we believe, which is that Jesus Christ founded a church, it is the Catholic Church, and it is the only place to be in terms of making sense of this existence that we're all experiencing. If you are listening to this and don't believe that, well then please reach out. We'd love to share this conversation with you, and then do your own assessment. Like, if you think that you can disprove what we've just walked through, we'll give you the conversation and take it, dump it into ChatGPT yourself, and try to poke holes and stuff. But I think if you are willing to take on that challenge and you do so from a position of intellectual humility and a willingness to follow the truth where it logically leads, I think that's a big ask. Like even me saying that out loud, I'm like, there's a lot of people who will say that they're prepared to do that and aren't prepared to do that. But if you are prepared to do that, it could lead you somewhere really beautiful. And I think you and I both know where that place is. But so yeah, if you've listened to this, by all means, reach out to us, and we're happy to share this conversation. And hopefully we can track down this gentleman who had this conversation and get him on for a future conversation, because along the themes of AI and everything, this is something we Christians, especially we Catholic Christians, need to wrestle with increasingly, because it's not going anywhere. This is our existence going forward. Any final thoughts or comments, Rigel, before we wrap up with a prayer?
Yeah, I think two things that I really want to highlight. One, I just want to repeat myself. Like why did God make it like hard to absolutely prove his existence? It was so that we could have faith, right? Like we need to choose him out of love, not because it makes sense. Like in a similar way, for anyone who's married, if our spouses were perfect and they didn't have any flaws that didn't matter to us, it wouldn't be a choice to love them. It would just be easy, right? And it can't be easy. Like God puts certain things in our path so that we have a chance to overcome them. It's like there are so many novels and stories where the hero is required to go on a quest in order to level up or find some truth, right? It's exactly the same way. Like God is not just like, here's a straight path, here's the truth, or here is your opportunity to sanctify yourself through your marriage. Like he doesn't do that. He gives you someone who challenges you, right? Who like causes problems for you internally so that you can become better. And he doesn't make it super obvious that he exists so that we can pursue him and find him, right? So it's our own journey to go on. So I think this conversation is a great starting point, but at the same time, I will also say, do not put your faith in AI. Like there are large corporations that have different agendas that have control over this technology. Do not put your faith in AI, but use this conversation as a starting point, and then just go on a journey.
That's exactly it. Well said, Rigel. And I think that's ultimately it. And if you that is ultimately what I did. At some point, I was the king of relativistic, stupid arguments because I didn't want to accept hard teachings and their implications for my life. And I did that for a very long time. And then when I finally, probably accidentally, because my pride would have prevented me for so long from doing it, when I kind of accidentally stumbled into this quest for what is true, it ultimately led me to the point that I am now, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And that's through God's grace. More than anything, I didn't merit that, and there's nothing I've done to deserve to get to the place that I am. But I'm so grateful for it. And so if you've listened to this and you have an interest in the conversation and want to see more, please reach out. We'll share it with you, and we'll probably be coming back to some version of this topic again in the future. Until then, Rigel, you want to wrap us up in our prayer?
For sure. And just in the spirit of the conversation, this prayer is AI generated. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, source of all truth, open all of our hearts and minds to seek you with honesty and humility. Reveal yourself to us in ways that pierce through doubt and awaken conviction. Strengthen our faith in the teachings and traditions of your holy Catholic Church. Let your light guide us, your Spirit teach us, and your presence anchor us in truth. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thanks, Rigel, and thanks AI for helping us with the prayer. Although, in fairness, you don't need help, Rigel. You're a way better prayer writer and prayer than I am. So, but thanks AI anyways for the help. Thanks to everyone who has tuned in for this conversation. Please share it, especially if you have friends who aren't believers, who rely on some version of scientism, which is an irrational belief in science, especially if that draws upon AI. Please share this conversation with them, and we would like to reach them if we can.
Actually, maybe one final parting comment. Like, I don't think in this conversation we're saying that accepting the truth will ever be easy, because it, like Travis said, it has moral implications for how you live your life. It's not going to be easy, but it'll be worth it. I think that much we can promise.
That's exactly it. It will be the opposite of it will be hard. Like it will be hard. It'll be hard every single day, and it'll be worth it, despite how hard it is. So, and if you've tuned in, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Until next time, this has been Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis. God bless you.